On the morning of the 8th of April, 2025, the heavy iron gates of Ouagadougou's central prison creaked open not for a media event, not for a transfer, but for something far more unexpected. President Ibrahim Traoré himself walked in, unannounced, no convoy, no camera crew. Just the echo of his boots on concrete and a single sentence that sent a chill through the guards. Take me to the man who's never heard his own name spoken in the language of justice, behind bars, in a dim-lit cell forgotten by the legal system, lay a mystery that would shake the foundations of Burkina Faso's financial security, a hidden trail leading to counterfeit currency, deep corruption, and a secret that powerful hands tried to bury. Why would a head of state risk everything for a prisoner no one knew? And what does this moment have to do with a printing house that never appeared on government records? Stay with us. Subscribe, share, and comment, because the truth has layers, and this is only the beginning. They led President Traoré down the dim corridor to cell 47. No spotlight, no fanfare, just the raw scent of rust and time. Inside sat Emmanuel, 38 years old, with eyes that had forgotten what daylight meant. He'd been imprisoned for 7 years, without trial, without legal representation, without a single family visit. His alleged crime? Stealing a computer from the warehouse where he once worked. The accusation came from his former employer. No physical evidence, no witness. Just a signature on a report that no one ever verified. Traoré didn't speak right away. He looked at the worn concrete floor, at the man whose life had been paused by silence. Emmanuel stood slowly, unsure whether to expect judgment or mercy. What happened next wasn't political, it was human. 2 hands met through iron bars, not as prisoner and president, but as equals caught in a system that often forgets the names it locks away. What if Emmanuel's case was never about a stolen machine, but about what he saw before the accusation fell? Emmanuel froze. His voice cracked, barely above a whisper. "Are you real?" For a man who hadn't been called by his name in years, the sight of the president standing inches away without cameras, without speeches, was too much to believe. Traoré didn't hesitate. He reached through the rusted bars and took Emmanuel's hand in his own. "Justice," he said quietly, "must begin by touching those who have been forgotten." There was no courtroom, no ceremony. But in that moment, something sacred passed between them, human recognition in a place built to erase it. Then, with calm authority, Traoré ordered the prison warden, "Reopen this case, tonight." The hallway echoed not with applause, but with the shuffling of stunned guards. Paperwork was summoned before midnight. Emmanuel's file, once buried under years of neglect, was finally brought to light. If justice can begin with a handshake in the dark, what else have we been overlooking in plain sight? On the 9th of April, 2025, just 24 hours after Traoré's unexpected visit, Burkina Faso's Ministry of Justice convened a special review board. The task: reopen the case of Emmanuel, prisoner number 047, detained for 7 years without trial. Within hours, investigators uncovered what should have never been hidden: a charge based on hearsay, no physical evidence, and detention far beyond the constitutional limit. The court records were incomplete. The original police file was unsigned. Emmanuel's name was never even assigned a public defender. By the 11th of April, the outcome was clear. After 2,557 days behind bars, Emmanuel walked free, a man failed by silence, now released by truth. In front of the courthouse, reporters expected a celebration, but Traoré, flanked by legal scholars and former inmates, said only this: "No one should lose their youth to the silence of a broken system." That night, the Justice Ministry announced a full audit of long-term detentions nationwide. Over 300 similar cases are now under review. What if Emmanuel was not the exception, but the mirror, and how many more are still waiting in the shadows? The 12th of April, 2025. Just one day after Emmanuel's release, President Ibrahim Traoré made a bold announcement on national radio: no one should lose their youth to the silence of a broken system. With that, he appointed Emmanuel Onse Forgotten, now forgiven as the head of a new national task force called Justice Light. Its mission? To audit every prison cell, every courtroom, and every unjust silence in the Republic. Standing before thousands outside the Ouagadougou courthouse, Emmanuel held the microphone with trembling hands. His voice cracked as he said, "I have nothing but my name and the trust of a man who chose to listen when no one else would." The crowd didn't cheer, they stood still, gripped by the weight of what justice could become. And just like that, a man once locked away without trial became the face of a movement meant to unlock a nation. But what happens when justice starts answering to the forgotten, not just the powerful? From the 14th of April to May 5th, 2025, Operation Justice Light moved like a quiet storm across Burkina Faso. Emmanuel, now 38, and carrying the scars of 7 lost years, led a team of young volunteer lawyers through 17 provinces, armed not with weapons, but with clipboards, legal codes, and an unshakable belief in truth. In just 3 weeks, they interviewed over 6,000 inmates, uncovering 422 cases of detention without sentence, and 76 missing case files' lives suspended in legal limbo. Inside prison walls where time had stopped, they asked only one question: have you ever seen your own file? Most shook their heads. Some hadn't seen daylight in years. What began as a review became a reckoning. Judges who had once turned away began reaching out. Court clerks, overwhelmed by guilt, retrieved forgotten archives from dusty basements. The system, long frozen in fear and bureaucracy, began to tremble and then shift. But this wasn't just about Emmanuel. It was about thousands like him, silenced by a justice machine that had forgotten its human cost. The media called it Burkina's quiet legal revolution, but inside those prison courtyards, it was louder than any riot. And as the days passed, one question grew louder among citizens and soldiers alike. If justice can awaken in the darkest cell, what else in this country is still sleeping? On May 10, 2025, the air in Ouagadougou was heavy with history. At a rare joint session of Parliament, Burkina Faso officially declared the 11th of April as Journée de la Justice, Justice Day. The date marked the exact moment Emmanuel, a forgotten man detained for 2,557 days without trial, walked free because one president chose to ask, "Where is the man whose name was never spoken in court?" From the parliamentary steps, President Ibrahim Traoré delivered a message that pierced deeper than applause. We cannot claim sovereignty while our citizens are imprisoned without anyone asking why. That statement wasn't just political, it was personal. It challenged the very idea of statehood redefining justice not as an institution, but as a duty of remembrance. Across the country, courtrooms paused. Schools held assemblies. In a village where Emmanuel once sold phone cards before being accused, children raised the flag, and recited one sentence: "Justice means being seen." And for the first time in decades, victims of bureaucratic silence felt seen, heard. But as the nation stood still to honor its awakening, one question echoed across radios, courthouses, and prisons alike. Is one day of justice enough to repair decades of silence? By mid-May 2025, President Traoré's promise of justice transformed into policy. 3 pillars of reform, each urgent, each irreversible, were launched under national decree. First, full digitization of all judicial records before the 1st of October 2025. No more vanished files, no more lost cases in dusty archives. Second, mandatory review of every legal file that remained stagnant for over 6 months, forcing accountability into the hands of judges who once delayed without consequence. And third, the creation of the Freedom Restoration Fund, a government-backed initiative offering mental health support, financial aid, and reintegration programs for those unjustly detained. This wasn't just bureaucracy, it was personal. Every policy bore Emmanuel's invisible signature. The man once forgotten in cell 47 now inspired a legal earthquake. In town halls and university classrooms, people asked, if one wrongful detention can reshape a system, how many more are still buried in silence? And as the reforms rolled out across 17 provinces, one lingering question rose louder than the rest. Can justice move fast enough to catch up with time already lost? On the 2nd of June, 2025, the prisoner's name, once scribbled on a forgotten intake sheet, was now engraved on the nation's highest honor. Emmanuel received the National Medal of Justice, standing tall in a suit borrowed from a fellow freed inmate. In his hand, not a script, but a folded piece of paper worn at the corners. His voice, quiet but unwavering, filled the hall. I was locked away because no one asked if I truly stole. Now I ask that question for every soul still unheard. That moment wasn't just symbolic, it was seismic. Schools replayed his speech. Judges paused before signing warrants. His face appeared not on ads, but murals painted by youth who'd once believed justice was a myth. He was no longer just Emmanuel. He had become a mirror reflecting both what was broken and what could be rebuilt. But one question echoed beyond Burkina Faso's borders. Could one man's redemption spark a continent's reckoning? By mid-June 2025, the ripple had crossed borders. Delegations from Mali and Niger arrived quietly in Ouagadougou to sign trade deals, but to study a movement. Justice Light, once just the name of a prison review task force, was now being whispered across courtrooms in Bamako and Niamey. What they saw wasn't just legal reform, it was a social awakening. A model where justice meant repair, not revenge, where forgotten names were spoken again with dignity. Burkina Faso had done the unthinkable. It put restorative justice at the center of national identity, not in the margins of NGO reports. Human rights organizations, once skeptical, called it the most honest step toward post-colonial accountability Africa has seen. Even the African Union requested a full brief on how a broken prison case turned into a continental blueprint. Meanwhile, radio hosts across West Africa debated, could this model clean up corrupt courts in their own countries? Could it reduce radicalization in overcrowded jails? Could it finally break the silence that cloaked decades of injustice? The change wasn't just legal, it was emotional, philosophical, Pan-African. And as Emmanuel stood beside foreign observers, no longer a prisoner but a teacher, one question lingered. If justice can rise in Ouagadougou, why not everywhere else? The final scene wasn't in a courtroom. It wasn't even in a prison. It was in the silence, after a question that still echoes. President Traoré turned to the camera, eyes steady, voice unwavering. How many more are just waiting for someone to walk in and listen? This wasn't just a story about forged currency or broken justice. It was about the cost of forgetting people and the power of remembering them. About a man who entered a cell without guards and came out with a truth too powerful to ignore. As the screen faded to black, one line remained. Justice doesn't begin in court. It begins in the heart. So we ask you now, what will you do with this story? Will you let it pass, or will you pass it on? Save this video. Share it with someone who still believes change is possible. Comment below. What does justice mean to you?